Microphone is live.
Did you just have Hack?
No, Hack didn't have a quorum tonight.
You're welcome. We're not going to have me here. I'm sure you're welcome to come to the table.
There you are.
Actually, maybe I'll go over. Fine. I don't need much.
Well, we don't have a quorum yet either, so let's see. Just, how's the sound with the?
Oh, yeah, we
filter
can,
thing? Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I'm already having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, we can bump it down to 2. That's full bore.
Hey, Ron, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Good to see all of you.
We're not hearing you yet.
Do I need to do anything to the owl to?
Is it, does it say it's, what speaker?
No, let me see if my speaker needs to. Oh, it thinks the projector is the speaker. Hang on.
Oh, okay.
I have a procedural question, which is in the last meeting, we said we would get a printed copy of the vision plan.
Did you get one in the mail?
No. Should I have?
Yeah.
Did I miss it? I went on vacation. No, I didn't see that.
Oh.
Came in the man with sticky.
Hi guys. I got mine just if it's
We
any.
have more copies. I'll go grab you one.
Sticky notes were on it.
It's all slides you've never seen before.
No, but this is just what I
Hey,
wanted.
hey, Ron, try talking again. Let me see if we got you now.
He says he's muted.
Well, now you're muted. Unmute and then try talking.
How's that?
Hey, here you go. All right. Meeting Owl is
Hi, Alex.
launched.
Hello.
Claire.
You guys can hear me?
I don't think this has any notes in it.
Thank you so much. I did go in the hospital on that on vacation, and so it's
Oh.
possible I
Could have
missed
gotten lost in the
something.
mix.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't.
Oh,
seen
we're
that
glad you're
at
here, Chiefin.
Yeah.
So I think we might get Jill by Zoom.
Okay,
I'm not distracting
No,
everybody.
no Shayla and
okay.
no Kate.
And we have a quorum with 4, correct?
Mhm.
Everybody just hang tight. I'm gonna share screen on the minutes and just see if it works. This, once you have camera and screen share and projector, this is where it gets interesting, with the Meeting Owl. So I'm gonna try it. Okay. So
Looking good. I can see you guys in it.
Zoom attendees can see it. Now Planning Commission can see it.
Yes.
All right.
Slide you guys out of the way.
By the way, I tried to ask for the password to get into the edit mode in this, and it never came through.
Mine came through, but in the spam folder, which is unusual.
Oh, I didn't look in my spam
Yeah,
folder.
usually.
I
it
got
just
the
comes-
same thing. Same thing, spam folder.
I looked multiple times. I tried multiple times. Oh, okay. So, have you called the meeting? to
I
order?
have not yet. I was just waiting for the screen to be all set to go. So
As, could I make a comment? I
Absolutely.
just wanted to thank Megan for chairing last time. I was very sick. It may not have looked it, I may have been grumpy. I wound up in the hospital the next day and, or 2 days later, and I'm okay. But thank you for doing that. And as you know, as of July 1st, Megan is the chair. So
So is
thanks.
it was a warm up.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just, speaking of which, well, we can start the meeting at 7:05. Just a quick note that I just made a note of that in the minutes.
Yes.
Because later in the minutes, I kind of step in and redirect us a few
Yeah.
times, and it might seem odd otherwise. So anyway, so any public comment? Do we have any public?
Yes,
Would you like to make some comments,
yes, I
Brian?
would.
Brian is here, Brian Forrest.
The town showed some civic engagement when it bought the,
I think you might need to speak up a little.
the town showed some civic engagement when it bought the town ski area. And as we move into a denser town, it needs to show some awareness of its civic responsibilities in the new and more denser areas. And those would include things like parks, fountains, playgrounds, library branch, sculpture, venues for impromptu meetings or concerts. And looking at the plan, I don't see anything like that. I don't see anything in there that would address the commons, that would make the people of Williston want to be there. It seems to me an ode to commerce, which is every open space has been gridded off in the streets, and all the streets have got buildings surrounding them. Presumably they're homes or businesses, and no parks, nothing that speaks to the common, or what would endear itself to the people of Williston. Christopher Alexander wrote a book, Pattern Language, in 1970 that talked about places in the world. They surveyed the whole world, places in the world that were special to the people who lived there. And I'm looking for, in this plan, one of those spaces that are special to people of Williston. We went through a process of designing Taft Corners, but that process does not guarantee a good outcome. It just guarantees an outcome. And what I'm seeing here is not a good outcome. I don't see a senior center. I don't see a pool. I don't see any of the things which I don't see like a town flower garden or something that the town would be proud of and speak to the essence of Williston. And I think this plan ought to be scrapped and started over again with certain goals in mind first, and make sure those goals are attained, and then let the rest take its place secondary. But if you don't start off with goals that are wonderful, exciting, and vibrant to the town, they're not going to come by themselves. So I think that's the first thing that has to be done, is start from what you aspire to, get those in place, and then let the rest of the pieces fall where they may. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I respond a little bit?
Absolutely.
So,
Chief, I just wanted to say quickly, because we're in this mixed modality, I'm going to try to be really careful about saying people's names to recognize them to speak. So just kind of keep that in mind. So Chiefin.
As people know, Brian's a good friend of mine, and I agree with every one of your goals. I disagree about the process. I feel as though we did have a clear objectives, and I feel as though we did have a lot of mind towards creating spaces that would be valuable, including open spaces, play spaces. We did not wind up on a particular location for a community center, but there's several possible locations. And we did not include a swimming pool, which had been suggested for a couple of reasons. But also, this is still in process. In my view, I have some significant issues with the way it stands right now. But I don't think we started off, I don't think we should scrap the whole thing. I feel as though we need to keep working it. And so I just want to say, I agree with your goals and I disagree with your characterization of the process or where we are. Although I agree that where we are does not have enough of some of what you were talking about.
So this is the topic of most of this meeting,
Yeah.
so.
Please stay. 'Cause we're-
Yeah, please stay, Brian. And I would like to just make sure that we get through the minutes and a few other things, if you'll bear with us through that and then participate in the conversation moving forward. So also want to say hello to Jill, who has joined us. Hi. Hopefully you can see everything and hear everything okay.
Yep. Finally.
Great. All right, so let's review the minutes. They should be up on your screen. And I'm happy to entertain a motion to approve, and then we can discuss any changes that need to be made.
I move we approve as amended.
Okay, moved by Chapin.
I'll
Alex?
second.
Thank you. Seconded by Alex. Comments, changes, discussion?
No, I'm fine with all the changes that are in the document marked already.
Anyone else? Okay, so we'll take a vote then. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended?
Aye.
Okay, looks unanimous. Any abstentions? I guess not, because we're all here. I can see you all. Okay, great. The next, so this is the minutes, which is showing, could we have the agenda of it? Because now we have notices from other jurisdictions.
Away. Go to the agenda. Almost there.
Sure.
It's running slow opening the agenda page all of a sudden.
Oh.
I don't know why. Sorry about that. Try again. Yeah, I'm gonna exit out of the screen share dialog for a second. I think that's slowing me down. Lost all my tabs earlier. All right. Okay. I'll see.
Okay, so I had a quick look at both of these and there's a lot in there. And I wondered if Matt, if you would be willing to kind of interpret them a little bit for us. Is there stuff that is directly relevant for Williston? And then I guess particularly from the South Burlington materials, is there anything we can learn from them? Because they look like they are in the midst of a very complicated process. And so are there insights or bits of wisdom that you would take from their process?
A great deal of gratitude that I work in Williston and not South Burlington. Most of what is in South Burlington, I noted official map because there is an official map change in there, which is kind of interesting. And it's turning a proposed through street, an east-west street that would have connected, I believe, Dorset and Spear Streets into a pedestrian or bike ped path, fears of cut through traffic, et cetera. Anybody who tries to get around Chittenden County by car knows it's very hard to move east-west, whether you're trying to get from 7 to Spear, Spear to Dorset, Dorset to 116. And that design makes it hard to get around by car. It also keeps a lot of neighborhoods really kind of quiet, secluded, and there's nothing that you can do about that isn't a compromise between those two things at this point. But the bulk of the South Burlington changes are about the transferable development right program, which is almost entirely contained within the southeast quadrant, which is the sort of more rural part of South Burlington. And South Burlington's been going through sort of a crisis of conscience for at least the last 20 years. About the southeast quadrant. It's where the natural resources are. It's where the remaining rural working landscapes are. And it's of course also a very popular place to build, medium-sized lot residential subdivisions for which there seems to be kind of unending demand. It's close to a lot of things. It's close to working at the hospital or the school or any of those things. So it's high demand. And to be really candid, it's been, from where I sit, a fight between those who already live in the southeast quadrant and those who would like to develop more in the southeast quadrant. Whether that fight is centered around conservation interests or wildlife habitat protection, or neighborhood character or traffic, that's been the debate in South Burlington for at least the last 20 years. And one attempt at getting some open space development in South Burlington has been to allow the transfer of development rights from one parcel to another. Initially, that program was contained entirely to the southeast quadrant. In other words, it wasn't about not building in the southeast quadrant and therefore building more in city center. There were some reasons for that. Primarily, the South Burlington wants to see development in city center. They don't want to make it any harder. They don't want to make people have to purchase rights out of the SEQ in order to do that. But there's a lot of, because there's a lot of negative feelings about new development in the southeast quadrant, there's a lot of bad feelings when if the parcel next door to your house is the one that receives the extra houses, and the parcel that you can't see from your back porch is the one that now won't be developed. It feels unfair to people. So there's a bunch of things in play there. There's the politics of it. There's South Burlington trying to adjust the incentives to try to make it all work and try to encourage clustering of development and maximum preservation of open space. The one thing that's really different about South Burlington from Williston is if you think of the southeast quadrant as South Burlington's ag rural district like we have in Williston, the big difference has nothing to do with land use policy or regulation. It has to do with the fact that sewer is available basically everywhere within the borders of South Burlington. If we had made sewer available in all of the ag rural zone of Williston, I would imagine that we would be in very similar circumstances in terms of, that infrastructure benefit would encourage a lot more development in Williston, or would be at this point. So Williston has done a really, in my opinion, good job of maintaining concurrency between where it zones for certain densities and where it provides critical infrastructure, whether it's interconnected streets or sewer, water, all of those things. So, this is just another iteration of an ongoing controversy. I will say the other thing about South Burlington is this is coming at the tail end of statutorily maximum allowed 3 years of interim zoning. When you go into interim zoning, it's essentially like a moratorium on new development for the area that the interim zoning covers. Any development that does happen has to go through the city council for approval. In other words, there's no by right approval, there's no approval at the DRB level. Everything's got to go to the city council before it moves on to any other level of review. So it really politicizes everything when that happens. And it's a really hard environment to work in because the city council, basically their job under interim is to compare what's proposed as sort of an interim draft bylaw and or city plan, it gets a lot more subjective, a lot less predictable sometimes, and really is not a way of exerting a long-term outlook on things. The idea of interim zoning in statute is that something's happening and you want to change the zoning and you don't want a bunch of poorly considered stuff sort of chucked in under the door at the last minute. So you do interim zoning, stops everything so that you have time to adjust your bylaws. But I think in the last 13 years, this is the third and a half, 3-year round of interim zoning in South Burlington. It can become just sort of an ongoing gridlock. And the last thing I'll say about that is it's one of my fears in Williston is particularly in the residential district or areas adjacent, is that eventually development becomes controversial enough that the select board is pressured to do something similar. Because in the end, in my opinion, it gets in the way of good long range planning that's well informed by the kind of research that goes into it here.
Okay. Great. Thank you for that
Brief summary.
synopsis and
Editorial.
critique. Yes. Yeah, Chapin, go ahead.
I just want to say what I got from it is part of what Matt just said, which is do not extend sewer past the interstate. That it avoids a whole class of problem. The other is that there's a parallelism of them trying to get the TIF district being their development core area much later in the game than we're doing with Taft Corners. We're much earlier in the development of the town in terms of population and number of houses trying to do that. And when we talk about the Taft Corners plan, I want to talk about how that compares also to Essex Junction versus Essex Town. And finally, there are a lot of details in that in red. First of all, that's back from November last year, I think.
Yeah.
And we'd seen it before, I think. But so I thought you included this time just for what it tells us that relates to our Taft Corners work. And a lot of the parts in there really are towards incentivizing the kind of things that we want, pocket parks. Some of the things that Brian was just mentioning are in there as incentives. And I felt like that you may be wanting to point us to including some of those in our form-based code. Is that not the case?
No, but it's not the idea of incentives, or I would characterize it as available waivers that are available if the DRB can make certain findings of fact. And when we talk about what kind of things do you do in your form-based code in order to be clear about what you want, but also be flexible in terms of dealing with unique situations that show up. Waivers with findings is a really good way to do it, because you're not just saying, well, here's the rule, but the DRB may modify this if they want to. You say, here's the rule, and the DRB may modify this rule by such and such defined amount when the following conditions exist, and then you list off what are the reasons. My example of the parking lot may occupy some of the street if it is bounded by a seating wall with a solar canopy over it. Mm-hmm. Just not saying that has to be in there. That's just a version of
yes.
that.
And there's a lot of that kind of thing in there I think we can borrow from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Alex, you had a hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just want to ask Matt in particular your opinion on, or take on, I read there was sort of a trade-off right at the beginning of the edits of the South Burlington thing of allotting civic space as part of the development. And I thought it was very sort of akin to what was just said at the beginning of this meeting in the public comment period. What do you think about that kind of provision and how we might use that in particular in the growth area in order to allot for more civic space where we don't own a lot of land?
Well, that's a good question. There are things that can be adjusted. One of them that I think is imminent to talk about is the town charges a recreation impact fee for all new residential development. We're talking about re-upping that fee because it expires in a couple of years and it needs some work. If someone were, as part of a development, going to provide public space that could be understood as recreation space, and it doesn't all have to be soccer fields, it can be playgrounds and fountains and sculpture gardens and places to rest in the shade and all of those things. that could be seen as an offset of that fee liability. So that's number one. Number two, what we do today in Taft Corners is the provision of an urban park is one of the 5 of 9 design criteria that are required for all new developments in Taft Corners. And we would have something similar with this, where there are minimum criteria. The big difference between the two things I'm talking about, what we might do with the green and the rec fee and the current urban park requirement, not any current requirement that any of those park spaces be public. In fact, the existing town plan really pushes off the development of park facilities in all kinds of development and says we want these to be private. We don't want to have to pay to maintain them. And the identification of the green spaces in Taft Corners in the vision plan as you have it clearly is only effective if most of those green spaces are publicly owned and maintained and operated. So one of the elements to talk that I would plan on talking to the select board about later this month is that there are land use regulations that we're going to try to write about this form-based code, and there are budget things and things about what kinds of streets will be specified in the town. But there are also really big programmatic shifts for the town embedded in a vision like this. One of them being, will the town operate, own, and maintain public green spaces in Taft Corners? Because today it does not. I mean, there are no public parks in Taft Corners. And I think to Brian Forrest's point, it won't be much of a place without those public spaces. But it's a sea change for the select board of formerly 2,000 people population, little old Williston, to take such an active role in the way Taft Corners evolves.
Okay, thanks for that question and for the clarifications about the other jurisdictions. I think we are all eager to get started with the form-based code for Taft Corners. So I'm going to suggest we move on to that. Matt, give me some sense of how you want to balance the transmittal memo. Do you want feedback on that versus the vision plan? What would be your?
Okay.
Which should we start with?
Let me give a quick introduction of both and how I think they relate, and then I'll just sort of take it from there with where the group wants to go.
Okay.
So the vision plan, hopefully most of you got a hard copy in the mail. Chapin didn't. We thought, and talking to our consultant, it was really going to be useful to have the whole document in front of you, be able to hold it, be able to flip through it, read it, hopefully forwards and backwards, and get a feel for kind of the overall direction of it all at once. So hopefully you've had some time to do that. As far as our process goes, we have this scheduled meeting. We have about an hour of time with the select board on July 27th. That's a special night for you and for them to do that, to talk over the vision plan. The vision plan is still an evolving draft. So staff has been working over these last few weeks with the consultant team to get people's names right, to make sure that policies are articulated correctly so that you will see wording changes as we go forward. And so now that you've all had some time, some weeks to look at that, tonight's a good night to get started talking over that. The transmittal memo is something that, as you've worked with the workshop report and the May 3rd presentation and where you knew we were headed with the vision plan, I wanted to try to structure and imagine a memo that says to the select board from the Planning Commission, here's this vision plan. And here are some things that we know and feel and understand about this vision plan that we'd like to come to an understanding with the select board on before we move on. So there's some upfront stuff in the memo about process, a little bit of history about planning in Taft Corners from 1990, and sort of why is it important to have a good vision, and then jump right into the coding that I keep talking about. And then an identification of the three big friction points that I think the Planning Commission has struggled with: density and intensity in building height, parking, and streets, and balance of green versus pavement and street width. And in each of those, what we talked about at a staff level was, well, okay, so the vision plan's a vision. It should be understood as somewhat fuzzy and somewhat flexible. You wouldn't do things that were completely 180 degrees from the vision plan, but you would do things that were inspired by it. So what does the vision plan sort of set as a clear direction? We use the term locked in, because I think sometimes people feel locked in by it. So, okay, what are some realities that we deal with in terms of meeting important town goals? If we want to move cars on the street needs to be so big. If we want to move cars and bikes and people, the street needs to be so big. If we then also want to have green, there's a dimensional level to that. And at some point, if you do all of that, the street becomes so big that it doesn't feel like a place anymore. Back to Brian's mention of a pattern language, the outdoor room, feeling of enclosure. So we try to structure each of those three friction point conversations in that way of, well, what does the vision plan really commit the town to going forward with? What can we work out when we jump into the coding exercise? And what's left? Is there something left in the plan, now that you've had it in your hands, that really needs to change before we're ready to jump into coding? So those are those three elements, and then just saying, let's get to it. There's a lot of excitement at the select board level. We'll be handing them a print copy of this at the end of this week, just like we handed to you. They're excited, they've seen the cool pictures, they're excited to talk to you all about it. And then at some point, we need to have an understanding between the PC and the select board that it's a green light to start working on the actual set of rules that would live underneath this thing. So
Okay, all
whatever
right,
makes
thank
sense to
you
start
for
with.
that. All right, so I'd like to start by asking any of the planning commissioners if you would like to comment on the draft vision plan, and then we'll see how that goes, and possibly do follow up and open up things a little bit. I would like to again just request that we do raise hands and respond. I'll call on you again, just for clarity with our many different ways of being together tonight. So
Before we jump in, it looks like we have a telephone participant joining us, phone number ending in 1469. If you would like to speak, you can press *9 to raise your hand and use *6 to mute and unmute.
okay,
And it'd be nice to identify too.
And you're welcome
Yeah.
to introduce yourself too, if you would like.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
It's Kate.
Oh, hey,
Oh,
Kate.
okay.
Sorry, I'm late. I just wanted to call in, and I'm going to be on mute most of the time.
Okay,
Great.
cool.
Thank you, Kate.
So for the record, that's Kate Lamar, Planning Commissioner.
Yeah. Okay, great. So so who would like to begin with some comments? And I also have some comments that I would like to make. So at some point I'll call on myself.
I have them, but I went first on the last one.
Okay.
So
All right.
someone else wants to
Can I just ask a question first before comments? Is that okay?
Alex.
Which is it possible to get an electronic but commentable version of this thing? Like I'm not great with Post-it notes. I can barely write with a pen. I grew up digitally. Is there like a Word version of this for adding comments and sending back to the planning staff separately?
With the vision plan, Alex?
Yeah.
Yes, we can use our Dropbox and enable commenting that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could just get a Word copy of it, and because it'd be easier for me to put some of the finer point language things in there. And then just a second question, which is the version that was delivered in paper exactly the same as the one we provided all the feedback on in the previous meeting? And has there been any changes to the document that we should be aware of since the last meeting? Since, frankly, in the last meeting, there was quite substantial comments.
Yeah, I can, just a couple things, Alex. There's a number of text changes. And there's some maps of the bicycle and off-street bicycle network that are being updated. There's a couple of graphics showing buildings where I asked them to drop the buildings by a story and talk about building height in terms of feet above grade as well as stories. So basically trying to capture the idea that building height might be allowed at what I call the next increment above what's allowed today, but not stories and stories above, and try to have the graphics reflect that. So there are a few illustrations you'll see in the Dropbox version, if you'd like us to put that out after the meeting, where some of those will be a little different.
And this
Thanks.
is more complete than what we reviewed before our last meeting. A lot of sections were left blank and have been filled in.
Yes, so to your point, Alex, compared to what you saw before, there's more that's been filled in here.
Also,
Yeah, I thought so.
another reason for the digital version would be, I found it really hard to read some of the images toward the back in the appendix. So that there were people's comments and stuff on from the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
And it was impossible to read. They were just so tiny. So if we can zoom in on those, we can get a better understanding of those as well.
Put me in the queue.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, two questions.
So this is Brian Forrest, for those of you such as Kate, who might not realize what's going on.
This is called a vision plan. Has the vision been written out? The vision that we're, no, the vision, a vision that we're attempting to put together or solve with this plan. Has the vision been written as what we're aspiring to accomplish with this plan? And the second question is this plan available to the general public as a Google Doc to make comments on?
So there's a number of written components to this plan that discuss the overall vision, reflecting back to the 1990 plan that said, make Taft Corners a design conscious downtown with a pedestrian orientation or a strong pedestrian orientation. It's been fleshed out in a number of different ways since then. Yes, it's in the text throughout.
It's available to the public?
The version that we'll be shipping to the select board on Friday, we will also put out publicly. And we'll probably be encouraging folks to listen into that meeting on July 27th. Although it's mostly that intent of that meeting is to be a conversation between the planning commission and the select board.
And I'd like to stress that this does not represent the planning commission's agreement. This is created by a consultant with our CC, our regional planning commission and our staff, and input from the planning commission, but we are still in the process of hashing it through. And so it troubles me to have the public read it and think it's the planning commission's plan. It's a working draft.
Yeah, they're trying to put together two groups. Consultants
Yes.
and planning commission.
Yes.
Okay, other comments? Chapin.
So, I apologize. So to me, there's a fourth area of friction, which is the order and the speed of implementation. Because there's many things in step one that I would like to see in step two or step three. Step one has development happening in the perimeters. And I would like to delay that. For instance, in the northeast quadrant where the Alliance Church property is, if 10 years from now we decide there should be baseball fields there, I would hate to have put a residential component right in the middle of it in step one. And so my feeling is we should focus on the core and on the Trader Lane, Wright Avenue, that part of the plan, and say that's got to be at least step two before we have residential development around the perimeter, because that's also competing with the open spaces and the green spaces. So I feel like it's wrong to jump to those parts. And that to me is a large point of conflict. I really liked, this is well thought, and I really liked the first page history.
This is the transmittal.
The transmittal memo draft. The history is great. I'm uncertain about the this phrase where it says, experience has shown it will fall short of creating the unity between those sites and buildings that great streets and great places must have. And I feel like the word great, we don't all agree on what great streets and great places is. And so I was a little troubled by saying that. If we want to say pedestrian friendly, yes, or if we just want to say desired, I'm okay. But great to me is a term of value that I didn't think we all agree with. I didn't feel good with the word great there. I would like this also to say something about CRG and the process that happened in the early 90s. We went through interim zoning then too, in the early 90s. Because Maple Tree Place came from people with competing interests, commercial and basically what's our town look like. It was very fraught. It was quite stressful. And people sat down and hammered it out and came up with Maple Tree Place that has this residential, affordable residential component, has that square and still has some big box stuff. And nobody was completely happy with it. Everybody got something that wasn't originally going to be done by a developer. And we'd fought Pyramid Mall forever. So I just feel like when we've done this iteration of work, we see so many opportunities in Maple Tree Place about how to enhance it and mold it that we don't see with the other things that have happened in a more fragmented way around Half Corners. And so I really think we should say, here's an example of where Maple Tree Place isn't the way you want it today, but it's a lot more workable as a starting point for what comes next than places that didn't have that much thought and that much discussion. So I really feel like that should be a model for what we're doing now in a sense. I have some bigger thoughts too, which I feel let me step back to the bigger thoughts. A couple of times the consultant said, this is your town center. And I don't want it to be the town center because I don't see the identity of Williston as being Taft Corners. I see the identity of Williston as being ag rural, village, civic center, and this business, commercial, residential center. So I think we need to think about what our language is about it and what it's going to be like in the long run. And to me, a couple of analogies are South Burlington with the TIF district and Essex Junction within Essex Town. And I worry that in the long run, this area develops and has nice places that people want to be, and suddenly they want to have their own governance and they don't like that the town offices are up here, but there's a lot of population there. And we could wind up with the kind of tension that we see in Essex Junction, Essex Center. And so I thought we may want to be really clear about what growth center is all we have right now, or Taft Corners. We don't have a word that describes what it is in the end. Is it a commercial center? No, it's because it's got residential too. What do we call it? And I also want to say in the big picture, we don't want to base our decisions going forward on how much sewer we have today. Because 50 years ago, we had no sewer. And at some point, somebody's going to decide to add sewer. And so I think it's important that we think about what the planning should be and the sewer should follow. The sewer shouldn't lead as it did in South Burlington. And so I think part of that is not planning based on the current sewer. It's saying, okay, what if sewer were added? What do we want so that we are ahead of the game? Also, how we've said one thing that isn't in here is just that we've agreed pretty much that we should have municipal stormwater. I think we should have municipal parks. We should have a lot of municipal features that are not part of our municipal planning. And some of those features are why other towns have TIF districts to raise money to do those, to build that infrastructure. We haven't talked about that. And I'm a little bit worried about falling short on doing some of those things if we don't, in fact, say we're going to take this on as a town. I also worry, I think one reason we don't have this municipal swimming pool in there is that there's a lot of people who live in communities in that area who already have a swimming pool because their homeowner association erected one. And I feel like that whole system of private things is a problem when it comes to this density. And Southridge has to deal with people letting their dogs, treating some part of their fields like dog park. And then other people who live right close to Southridge can't go in their pool. And it's just it's like it's too divided up. It's too, the ownership. So I feel as though the way to deal with that is have the ownership be town-wide, have the town be responsible. And we've moved in that direction. The town's taken over stormwater ponds that were part of these individual HOAs until recently. They upgraded them and now the town is taking ownership of them. And I feel as though we need to be forward looking on that. And so to me, it's a point that needs to be in here somewhere that we need to make this decision. And it's a big one.
Yeah, and that could very well match with Matt's comment about the sort of programmatic shifts
Yes.
toward maintenance and, the town taking on a new set of roles, both financially and in terms of staff.
On page 2, I feel as though in terms of what's not locked in is the amount of public space along the streets. And I was really helped, I don't know if it was Taylor or someone else said towards the end of the last meeting, remember there's not just one kind of street. Some streets are more residential, some are more commercial, some are core, so forth. So I haven't looked at this yet to see if those are separated out, but the amount of public space along the street is, maybe that fits in your first category. On page 2, the picture shows Route 2A, looking at the Maple Tree Place core. And I've been giving a lot of thinking to this thing about what to do about 2A and not liking the way this plan keeps putting buildings closer to everything. And I feel as though Route 2A should maybe be a boulevard meaning that there's a median. And a median with trees. And the middle section of Dorset Street in South Burlington would be a model to me. There's 2 lanes going in each direction, a median with grass and trees, and then fairly wide paths on the side. So it's got the same width that right now we have on 2A, but it's a very different feel, primarily because of adding that median. The median could even include a path for a within that district shuttle. It's another opportunity to have people actually be in that median. And if you think about some European cities where the public is actually right in the street in many regards. So this particular picture has many things I don't like. And so I don't know. Whereas this one I love. On page 3, the third bullet says, if streets are widened too much to accommodate large dooryards, the sense of enclosure and the street as a place unravels. And unravel to me is a really strong word to say. It's a trade-off. And the range we've been talking about and the pictures that have been shown are not, to me, I understand there's this pressure to keep things close because it does something for place. But to me, it doesn't unravel if you add 5 more feet for snow removal space or something. And so the word unravel bothered me. On page 4.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm just asking, does anybody have this document so we can display it on the screen? Because my page numbers don't match your page numbers for some reason. So I don't know that I'm even looking at the right spots.
Alex, this is the transmittal memo that we're looking at right now. Chapin had comments on.
Yeah, is it possible for somebody to just screen share it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Easier.
Sorry, Chapin, what page are you on?
That comment was on page 3, the third bullet down. The very last word says unravels, and I just thought it was too strong.
Yes.
And it was the previous page. Can you make it so we can see it too? Yeah, unraveled right there in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And on the previous page, it's that picture at the bottom that's of Route 2A looking at Maple Tree Place that has many things I don't like. That's where the parking garage is. It's those white buildings are in front of what now is the Christmas tree shop and all that. And they've added trees, but they haven't broken the street up. And I really want to think differently about that. Okay, so going on page 4, I just want to say Wright Avenue, I really like the idea that that's part of our core, along with Trader Lane. And we've had discussion about whether this is enough space for people to let their dogs poop and snow be removed, but that's well represented in this document. The right side of here is a building that's between the bank that's there, which is very attractive building, and this street. And it's shown in this document. And to me, that's a mistake to just close. I just feel we can use the space differently. In a sense, I feel like this is saying we always have to have buildings within so many feet of the center of the street. And I feel like we don't always need to. Page 5, which is titled Elements of Consensus. The picture has the problem that I see because it has those phase 1 buildings. The dark brown is phase 1 or step 1. And all the dark brown that's in the northeast, the west, and the southeast, to me, doesn't belong in phase 1. And so I have a real hard problem with that. Whereas there's not enough dark brown on Trader Lane. To me, there's just a little bit in Taft Corners, but nothing on Trader Lane. And Trader Lane, to me, and Wright Avenue is where we should be focusing initially, in my view.
This is.
Can I ask a question about this? Because you mentioned the phases a couple of times. Is that okay if I interrupt real quick with a question?
Hold on 1 second, okay? This is showing 2070. This is not showing phase 1.
So the gray things here are in
Right,
1
the
and
gray
2.
are already
Oh.
built.
So does that match this? I'll look at that while you.
Yeah, go
Thank you-
ahead,
Thank you
Alex.
for clarifying.
Can someone just explain to me the phases? Because I don't really sort of quite follow, right? If somebody comes to us immediately after we've finished the form-based code, it says, I own the Alliance property. I want to build on it. Here's my plans. There's not going to be something that says, like, you can't build there till 2050, or you can't build there until Wright Avenue is constructed, correct? Like, there's no, like, we don't really get to control the order in which these things are built, or is there some sort of like time element to the form-based code that I'm not understanding?
I think
Matt.
Ever since Chapin started his comment, I've wanted to address this a little bit, and I appreciate everybody's engagement on this. So there is a section in the revised vision plan that's probably gotten the most attention toward the end before the appendices, called overarching issues. And I don't know if you have any of overarching issues or not in the one we sent out a couple of weeks ago, where we try to identify some of the big things that are in play that are either challenges or things we have to really think about. And one of them is the sequencing of development in this area. And we've heard a desire to not have development in Taft Corners be scattershot, that things would be better if there was focus, for example, on Trader Lane to start, or Wright Avenue to start. And so there are some tools in terms of the way the town either invests in infrastructure or sequences development through growth management or incentivizes development under its growth management regime, that might help, at least on the residential side. One thing I can say is if we don't want people to build stuff on Trader Lane right away, if we didn't, that would be really easy. We just don't build Trader Lane because no one's building it if the town doesn't build it. That's just where we're at. That said, what I also want to bring to light, and as you're thinking about this vision and the regulatory scheme that it would lead to, is that there's zero sequencing within this area or phasing within this area today in terms of what is developed first and what is developed second. And Alex is absolutely right. Someone could show up tomorrow with a pre-application to subdivide the Essex Alliance Church property. And it's in the same zoning district as much of the rest of the plan area. That subdivision would be processed under today's rules, which would allow for a certain sequence of events to take place out there. It would be entirely developer driven. The town would exert about as much authority over how much green space would be on that parcel as it has been able to at Finney Crossing. And I'll just leave it at that. So I think that's part of, I wrote this memo as if it's a draft from you to the select board. There's probably a little more of me in it than most of what I write in my work. But at the staff level, and maybe it's because we're sitting in a room with about 700 rolls of plans stacked up from Williston's development history, there's a sense of urgency and a sense that things can really move very quickly, and they have in Williston before. So overarching issue, yes, this is a better plan if things are built in some kind of harmony with one another in some sort of sequence. Yes, the town does have some tools it can choose to use in that, both on the regulatory side and the infrastructure investment side. And it's those same things that cost developers money that cost the town money: sewer, stormwater, roads. Any place where the town chooses to take a more active role in the construction of those things will be a place where there's focus for development, for sure. And that's totally the story of South Burlington City Center and their tax increment finance district, to build Market Street and then to build the other streets there. That's a place that was planned for development forever. And the owner of most of that land said, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to me to develop what I could develop in City Center, South Burlington, because it's going to cost me so much to build the road. And the city made a decision at the elected official level, and eventually at the voter level, at the ballot box, to pursue a public-private partnership that is really different from anything Williston has ever done before.
So in terms of feedback for the vision plan, I think that this map I'm switching to the vision plan, and I'm looking at page 47, which is a map which shows these overarching issues, future character areas. And I totally agree with Alex. I feel like this, this map in itself would be way more helpful if it was kind of a phased thing or a priority thing. I don't know what flex core means. And so, I mean, I understand, I can read the caption, but most intense level of mixed use downtown type buildings, but that doesn't say this is our highest priority to build out first.
Right.
And so I think these are all really good, important comments, because
And I don't see a step one plan in the document anymore, in the vision document. It was something that was discussed at the last meeting. Step one, step two, step three. And I misinterpreted this because it has a little thing in the front top right that says step 2070, but right under that it says step two in the inset box.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought this was step one, that was step two, and step 2070 is question mark. What is that going to be? So I think we need to be clear.
Design hierarchy.
Yes. And in answer to your question, Alex, about how do we tell someone they can't do something? My feeling is if we say, we want to preserve the outer areas and have it develop more in the center initially, then we make the zoning say that the outer area is reserved for future town use. And it may come a point where the town has to decide whether to buy them or not. But I feel like we have to use whatever tools we have if we want to pressure development to happen in the center first.
Yeah, I understand what tools we have. I'm not sure if that's a tool that we have to say we reserve this for town use when it's land that the town doesn't own, right? That's sort of it's a tough thing to say to somebody, hey, for the next 50 years, you can't do anything. I think instead, it maybe makes sense to treat it as sort of these aren't really phases. This is more sort of, phase one, they're saying this is the most dense. Phase two, they're saying this is the next dense. And phase three, it's not phases at all. It's like a ladder of development density. And I think if we got what's in the Essex Lions Church in this plan first, before we had Trader Lane built and things like that, I suspect, that we'd all be relatively happy with that, because what's built there is sort of appropriate to this plan. if that makes sense. I think the whole phase language is confusing because it sort of spells out something that doesn't exist, at least as far as I understand it.
The goal, though, 1 second, Taylor. I think the goal should be, I mean, I think there is a goal to avoid a sort of scattershot development, right? Like having a little piece of Trader Lane and a little piece of Essex Alliance, even if they were totally in conformance with this plan, that's not going to have a momentum either financially for businesses nor for marketing residences or building public green space or anything. So I do think we have to think a little bit in terms of timing. Maybe we don't want to go as formal as saying phases, but I do think the timing matters, and the sort of progression of it matters, so that we don't have things really fragmented and scattershot. Taylor, go ahead.
I'd like to direct us all to page 17, if we could. And that is sort of the full view of the growth center in step 1. And I want to look at the text at the bottom of the page. I'll read aloud for a second. There's the illustrative plan and illustrative step 1. An illustrative plan illustrates the vision by showing one way development might occur within the community vision. These speculate about developments that are likely and or preferred to happen in the near or medium term. The overall Taft Corners map is shown first, followed by close-ups of individual areas. So I think that's just what the consultant team is trying to say here is what Alex kind of caught up on of we aren't saying in this vision plan that we're going to require phases. We're just kind of saying that looking at the market, looking at where the municipality may invest in building Trader Lane, this is where we would expect development to occur in step 1. We very purposely called step 1, not phase 1. Same thing for step 2. I think that to Chapin's point, Matt already really talked about this, so I won't spend too much time on it. But there are tools if the town, if the PC does want to have a much more hands-on phased approach to how the growth center is built out over time. I think Alex's point of we don't. It may be difficult to essentially prohibit development in certain areas for up to 50 years, but these are specifics that we can work out when we're coding, potentially when we're as Matt mentioned, revising the growth management part of the code. So does that make sense to folks that kind of the vision plan is kind of showing possible steps, but the specifics of timing and phasing is really something that we could try to work more on when we get to code?
Yeah, I think in my quick reaction is that part of it is a matter of layout and visual cues that might be clearer. And so that, which is obviously just a communication issue, but Chapin, go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Taylor, because I had not had this and I couldn't find the step 1 drawing, and it's on page 17. It's really clear. And you can see why I'm confused, because step 1 has the Essex Alliance Church thing there, and here on 2070 has it. I'm wondering if this new one from the transmittal is intentionally putting that in 2050 rather than in step 1 because of previous comments, because my comment couldn't be stronger that right now the northeast quadrant of Taft Corners area is heavily residential. It has probably 90% of the residential in the Taft Corners district is already in the northeast quadrant, Finney Crossing and all that. And so the idea of adding more residential in the Essex Alliance Church doesn't meet my opinion that for us to be a workable, livable, pedestrian-friendly place, we need to have residential mixed in with commercial throughout the area. And so it sort of leads to more concentration of residential in one quadrant. And that's one of the areas next to a natural area, one of the areas that could be municipal space, such as community gardens, such as community center, such as fields, park. And so I have a problem seeing it identified in step one. And that was my comment previously, and it's my comment to this day, which is whatever we decide to do with the Essex Alliance Church property, I don't want to encourage early residential development there. Oh, can I say my last comment on the transmittal note? I have only one more.
Sure.
Which is, and you can see it right here in that phase one, right in the core at Taft Corners. The plan has us moving the farmhouse over to where the Friendlies little point is, and has a lot of building around that pond. And I really want to see, and this comes back to Brian's point too, we have an opportunity to put a transit center there, and we're starting to crowd it with other things. And we're adding more buildings. And I view this as the place for open space in the center. It's like if you go to Washington, DC, the mall, which of course is humongous compared to this, but the mall, it gives you a place that you can go to the center and look out at the pieces. And I feel like that's what should happen at this core around that existing stormwater pond. And so I really want to keep it open and allow for expansion of municipal services, like if the transit center has to get twice as big, or we decide we need some other service that isn't now offered, like the police need a barracks right there where the Friendlies building is or something. To me, I would like to reserve that whole little space as municipal. And to me, that's a point of contention. In other words, if we send this to the select board and they like the idea of what's there around the pond, they're missing what to me is one of the most important points, is to pre-reserve some space. And I say that from long, hard experience trying to get a transit center in Burlington and finally having to take over a street and some trees from the cathedral just to get it in the middle of the street. And the same thing in Montpelier, trying to squeeze a transit center in by the railroad tracks. And you see it over and over. And so we are saying that public transit and mode shift is part of our future. Let's give it more space than it needs, a lot less at this point.
Okay, other comments or questions from anyone we haven't heard from?
Right there, a comment on
Oh,
what
good.
Jason
Oh,
said.
thank you, Chapin.
The sunset.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
We have this open space here. We have a green here. If all these streams were actually identified as green, we would see that there's
Yes, a
green
diagonal
here,
green.
here,
Yes.
and it goes right straight on through here, right to this corner. And
Yes.
this whole thing should just be continuation, build upon this green, which is our only town green, and
Yes.
extend it and connect it so that all that is open, and it brings the rural character of Williston right at the core of Taft Corners.
Yes.
So folks, what Brian was pointing to was still looking at page 17. And yeah, so Matt's got his cursor running up and down, sort of envisioning like a green, a continuity of green from the bur oak over to the
Diagonally from the
Taft Corner.
intersection all the way down to the Bur Oak Hill. And I think there is strong support for the idea of natural trails on Bur Oak Hill, making that a feature.
And then some of those perpendicular to the diagonal greens are because of the power line.
Yes,
Right, that's all Velco.
yes.
Yeah.
And the idea of adding gardens there is fantastic.
This is Alex. I have just one or two real quick comments.
Sure, go ahead.
So I agree with almost everything that Chapin said. One sort of add-on to what he said about municipal spaces, and I think the gentleman in the room is Brian as well, if I've got your name right, said about municipal spaces. Should we consider adding to this plan something akin to like a set of target parcels the town should consider acquiring to reserve for community spaces? Because that seems to be the one really negative piece of feedback, which I agree with, and I think I mentioned last week to the company who built the plan, that there's just not really anything else here but commercial and residential. There's no community center, there's no police station, no library. Should we say like, hey, these couple areas here would be good? Because we can't say, hey, this can only be used for the town if it's privately owned. Like, I don't think we're allowed to do that, are we?
So this is,
Somewhat.
I'm going to anticipate what Matt is going to say, which is that this is the role of the official map. And I'll turn it over to Matt to kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, so if you recall the official map, which is appendicized here, we've been thinking about official map mostly as a mobility tool, talking about places that we want to acquire right of way, either for streets or sidewalks, multi-use paths or trails. But in Vermont law, official map is all about planning for community facilities and identifying them on a map called the official map. And when you do that under statute, you gain rights to ask that private development be shaped around what you want on the official map. And where that takes you is if you stand there and say this parcel needs to be a park, and the developer stands there and says, no, it's my land, I'm building a building there. What official map says is the town has the ability to then purchase that piece of land, to buy the developer out. Where otherwise the developer would just say, no, it's going to be a building, I'm following all your rules, now I'm going to go build my building. And what we've heard from most communities that have an official map is it doesn't usually go that far to the point where the select board's making a decision about actually buying something out. There's usually give and take. As I said, there might be relief from a recreation impact fee or transportation impact fee. There might be other bonuses in the code. Don't put your building here, but put one over here that uses your density somewhere else so that we can have this parcel for green, et cetera. But that's what official map is all about. So here I am, just somebody who likes to ride my bike through Williston, and I say, let's do an official map so we can get the multi-use path connections we need. And next thing you know, I'm talking about mapping, I don't know, 10 or $20 million worth of private land into.
Yeah. I mean, you said exactly what I expected you to say, right? This is a bit of a softball question, because I feel like what's lacking from this document in the memo is the context of something akin to an official map of the growth center that says, hey, here are the parts that we want to be civic. There's zero civic space in this except for that tiny little sliver next to Shaw's for the transit center. And I think there needs to be more civic space. I think it's been said, so I don't need to repeat it ad nauseum. But what I think is you can't get this point across to the town council and stuff that we are happy with this vision until we go back and revise this document and these maps to reflect an official map that contains some level of civic space. I think the map is lacking that. The vision is lacking that. That's my big meta comment on the plan. Everything else, finer points. I agree with Chapin. I don't really have a lot of finer points.
I would just, I don't want to, sorry, Megan, I hate to interrupt, but page 32 and 33, if we can go there real quick to directly get to Alex's comment. I don't think this totally answers Alex's comment, but I do want to direct us there. Page 32 does show, I believe it could be more explicit, but essentially the civic greens and natural areas. I think it's implied that they're municipally owned, but it isn't clear. So perhaps we can make that clearer. And then on page 32, again, very general, but identification of just some general locations of future civic uses throughout the growth center. Not identified specifically, could be that swimming pool, could be that library branch, could be whatever else, but just some prospective locations. But I hear you that there should be more explicitness and connection to the official.
Put it up front. Anything in the appendix is, sort of, it's going to be a little bit buried, right? I don't think that part's in the appendix, but it's in the overarching issues, right? Or the last page of the draft, one of the two. And I'm just saying, like, you put it in the transmittal memo, put it up front that, hey, we've thought about civic spaces, because the big feedback we're getting is, hey, you haven't thought about civic spaces. And what you're saying is, yeah, we have. It's just on page 33.
Yeah. Another thing to note too is, I think about it is we're like the next big tenant. We're the target that wants to come Williston and think about it as being a private developer in a way, like if we want community space in Taft Corners, that's where there's the budget lineup item for, what's it called? Just a community center scoping study where the town does a scoping center, okay, what do we want, what's our trajectory for that? What's it gonna cost? And then go have those negotiations with the private property owner of, we wanna be here, this is what we wanna build, and this vision plan is, all right, where is it gonna go on the gridded street and what's the exterior gonna look like? But think about the town in a way, as a private developer, we wanna be the next big thing in Taft Corners. We've done our homework in terms of a scoping study, and I don't know where that falls on the select board in their budget. I know it's been pushed off a couple times, but that's the town's next step, and that can probably get reflected to in here and in the transmittal memo, but something to keep in mind that there's other elements outside form-based code that are at play for getting those really key public spaces built.
I'm wondering if we could if that could be added to the transmittal, that we are in the process of talking about this and we feel that there's going to be a need for,
Talk about it more.
yeah.
So, yeah, and this document lives in Word as opposed to the vision, which lives in InDesign, where it's easier to just do comments. So we can put this out like you do your minutes and let the whole group dive in over the next, say, week and a half, and then we can go back to the transmittal on July 20th. I think rolling some more of these things in and reminding ourselves and the select board of these other programmatic things that are in play in Williston, i.e. the development of the official map, the possibility that the town chooses to invest in building Trader Lane, which keeps kind of, we've been not building Trader Lane for about 15 years now. We need to make some decisions about building Trader Lane. And that is imminent.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, demand to build residential is kind of bonkers right now. And we're about to enter the silly season where all the pre-applications come in the door for new residential projects in Williston in the next 2 months, and it'll start to get real.
Alex, was that the end of your questions? And
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I would like to take my my turn. And I, certainly welcome more discussion and hopefully we'll continue our conversation. I had very much a very similar reaction, even though I read page 33. My sense was from the vision was a little bit of frustration with the amount of kind of, I don't know, almost like a click happy reaction with lots of 4-story residential buildings, click, 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 and here, let's put lots of trees, click, 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 and then like, here's our vision. I felt disappointed in the fact that essentially everything, seemed very much in the private realm, and again, of course, commercial, right? I mean, these are not going to be publicly owned housing units. And or stores, right? So that was one concern. And I guess related to that and kind of in a bigger picture are some really important social changes that we've undergone. One, and challenges that we face. So a huge one is obviously the pandemic. So we know already, a colleague of mine at UVM is doing a study of folks who are leaving large cities and moving to Vermont. We know that that's happening. We know that more and more people are working from home, and that's probably going to stay to some degree, working remotely. That suggests increased pressure in these residential spaces, like beyond even what we're seeing now. We also, that kind of complements the challenge of climate change in the sense that when people are more likely telecommuting and working from home, they may not need to, the journey to work is fundamentally shifted. And so our commuting patterns, which we've always built so much stuff around, are already shifting tremendously. And I think this is a moment for us to kind of capture those shifts. A third piece of this shift that I'm seeing has to do with retail. And I was dismayed I don't like Wright Avenue. I'll just put that right out there. I really, really, really wanted the Main Street to be on the east section of Route 2, right by where Healthy Living is. I feel like, and let me just explain why. First of all, it's mislabeled in here. It says something about the west side of the east. My reasoning for that was that it is already a place where there is a manageable amount of traffic. There is flow there. There are, it's at the intersection. It's an existing space. The town owns some land right near it where, presumably the transit center could go. And it's very open and empty primarily because of the parking lot in front of Shaw's, but also for other pieces of it are kind of empty, like in front of 99, right at that other side of that corner. And I have seen over and over again failed efforts at constructing a Main Street from nothing. Right. Wright Avenue currently has nothing except for CVS, right, and a bank. Like we have so many banks, like that's not even a feature. And so I am very, very, very skeptical about Wright Avenue being any kind of success. And even if you built Trader Lane, I just don't think it's going to be. It's not going to be attractive to a developer. I don't think it's going to be interesting for people. And this comes back to the retail. Anita, the economist on this team, said we shouldn't plan on any additional retail. And yet Wright Avenue is so heavily dependent on retail. It's all about storefronts on the first floor. And I just don't think that is, that kind of adds to my sense that it's not a good plan. From the pandemic, and even before that, we know that retail is already, brick and mortar retail is really, really under fire. And so, this person who's telecommuting, moving to Vermont, lessening the amount that they're driving, is also ordering stuff online. And so I feel like all of those things kind of gel together into a really different mode of daily life. And I feel like we need to, to be ahead of the curve, we should acknowledge those changes and try to foster the good pieces of them. The good pieces being, and here's my real point, public space. And I totally agree. I'm so glad you came tonight, Brian, and made your comments, because I'm like very, very much in agreement. I feel like this plan needs people in it. I feel like we need to prioritize people's daily lives, people's ability to, to raise kids, to take care of elders, to have a sense of connection in the community. And all of those things are fostered by public space. And sorry to be so long-winded here, but I've been saving this up for a while I listen to all of the rest of you. The other piece of this that I really feel is important is that I feel like we need to hold this plan up to scrutiny with our energy plan and our public health amendment. It's an amendment at this point, right?
Those are both amendments.
Yeah, the energy plan amendment and the public health amendment. I feel like the goals of those are not adequately reflected in the vision as it exists now. And primarily that could be fixed by additional intentional public spaces. And I don't mean just green spaces, I mean, a small paved, performance area. My breakout room was super into the performance space, the outdoor performance space. Maybe it's a mini amphitheater with a little stage or something like that. Maybe it's a splash park. Maybe it's, a playground that's integrated with as an intergenerational space that has benches and shade and things like that. But the public space, especially in this sort of new frame of life that I'm describing, of this work from home, order stuff online, person or family, is that means that people need to connect in other ways. They're not necessarily going into an office for work. They're not necessarily going shopping to a brick and mortar store. Well, then let's prioritize the public space, the public realm. And I just feel like we have a moment where we have a chance to really elevate the public health benefits of strong public spaces and the climate benefits of strong public spaces. And I feel like this plan right at the moment just doesn't do it. So there's my monologue.
Where do coffee shops and restaurants fit in with that?
Yeah, I mean, those are often called third space because they're neither private nor fully public. They're privately owned, publicly accessible. And I totally think those are wonderful,
So
right?
we should.
Oh,
build
absolutely,
them
we
in,
should have
yeah.
those. But there's only so many a population can support too. And we could also have a conversation about whether, our previous, before Chapin, our planning commission chair, Jake Nathan, was always going on about the fact that we don't have bars. Like we don't, because of some, there's a cabaret law or something. I don't even know what it's called, but there's some kind of law
Have to serve food.
that prevents us from having bars in Williston.
Well,
Now, I don't necessarily want lots of bars in Williston, but I'm just saying, like, let's put it all on the table, right? Because that is characteristic of a place that is vibrant and has actually a nightlife, not just a day life. And, maybe it's more craft breweries or something like that. But like, let's think broadly about what attracts people, how do people connect with each other? What kinds of settings are those in? What time of day is it? All those things.
So my question back to you, because
Yeah.
you'll have a couple weeks to think about this, is how much of that can be done in words?
Yeah.
And how much of that needs to be done in mapping additional spaces onto the map?
Yeah.
Or do we say, these green spaces are great, we need twice as many, some of them may not be green, they may be amphitheaters, gathering spaces, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, I think for all of you, group, when can you get to a vision plan document you can live with if you're willing to hand it to the select board with this other document that says, yeah, but when we get into writing the rules for how any one site might be developed here and the plan for how these streets might lay out, this stuff's really important to us. And we don't want to, this vision's not complete for us without this and this and this. And how much is it? There's got to be another picture in here of that. Or give me a picture of Route 2 as a main street.
I would
That's
love, I
gotta be
asked
in
for
there.
that. I was really hoping to at least see it, I thought about doing it myself, but I don't have the skills.
I think part of the consultant team's recommendation there just came down to what's in the control of the town and what today is not. But
Right.
we're talking about a plan, we're talking about buying green space. We're
Yeah.
talking about regulating things in ways we don't today. You want to talk about taking over a piece of state highway? I mean, we do talk about it. We just say if in the, great distant future we do. Taylor, tell me if I'm way off, but I think you can say at least those words. We see some potential here.
Yeah, no, I think we can certainly add more language about, I don't know, maybe in the overarching issues section about the importance of public space and sort of the potential of how people are changing how they live and work. If we want to more directly address the Class 1 town highway discussion too, we can do that too, Matt. I do want to make one point while I have the floor, and it's something that we don't really talk about as an overarching use, but maybe I think we should just reiterate it. This is not to critique Megan on Wright Avenue. I was in Megan's group, and I was pushing for Route 2 as well as the focus of Main Street, but consultant felt differently. I think it's important with form-based code that we remember that the focus isn't on use. The focus is on design. So when we see those shop fronts on Wright Avenue in the vision plan, the use that goes within those structures, we can be very non-regulatory in our code about that. It can be a bar, it could be a retail, it could be an accountant's office, it could be whatever. It could be residential if we want to. I'm sure we're gonna have a talk about that. The residential in the first story. We're gonna talk about that eventually when we code. But like we can be very, very loose. So I think, from my perspective, push back, but from my perspective, what we see there is, in terms of those pictures, is like we want to know that the general design of those structures is kind of what we're after. The situation of those structures is kind of what we're after. I heard Chapin already push back on that a bit, but don't focus too much on the use. I think use can be flexible, and we'll figure out how much is too flexible or not flexible enough when we start to code with you guys and start talking through what sort of uses may or may not be appropriate for Wright Avenue or other streets throughout the district. Okay.
Yeah, I let me just respond quickly. I totally hear you, Taylor, and I appreciate that. And I appreciated your your support in our breakout room. I feel like I think in terms of the visuals in this plan, we don't have any sense of that, right? In this plan, what we're seeing is residential with retail in the bottom. And that's something that we all already have like a mental image of. So I would love to see something that isn't that, right? Or that kind of mixes it up in some way, or really makes us stop to think about like, oh, well, what would that be if there was public space on the ground floor? Like, what would that even mean? Is that a community space? Is it, could it be a childcare center? Like, can we think beyond the coffee shop, right? Like, I love coffee shops, but like, we don't need several of them all in a row, right? And so I think in terms of trying to capture some of the potential variety, we need better visuals. That's totally accepting your comment about the use, but I feel like this is already predetermining some uses that are already very common in our mental images, and it's just kind of reinforcing that in this loop. And that means that we never break out of it, right? It's very hard to break out of that and think more creatively about uses if all we've been kind of digesting is these things that look a lot like, places that we all go all over New England, Okay.
Okay.
So,
okay. Is it, let me talk with Matt and talk with the consultant team, see if we can maybe shift a visual. If you guys have a preference, let Matt know if it's Wright Avenue or another one of the visuals to maybe kind of show a different kind of use besides a retail use, kind of mixed with residential, just to provide more variety and more acknowledgement that things are going to be different than just retail with residential above.
Yeah, that's great. Jill, go ahead.
Just, I love what you're saying.
Your audio is a little odd. Can you try again?
Can you hear me now? Did not speak, so.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, you hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me now? Yeah. 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 Can you hear me now? Yeah Yeah, I just,
Oops.
Wait, we lost you again. Hold on.
We can put some, yep, 32 and 33, could there be some, if they have this magic to create 4-story buildings?
We can't hear you.
again.
It's like
It
you're
gets garbled.
underwater.
I think you might need to turn off your second source of audio.
yeah, I got 2 computers. Maybe. Sorry,
That's much
I
better.
was just wanted to say that I love people bringing this up about really like putting some of this community stuff really prevalent in the document. And I think if they're able to create these drafts for 4-story buildings and commercial, I feel like there's space within the document on 32 and 33 to have images of a community pool, like where it would go, like how it kind of looks. I think giving people images to see like where's the draw then for us, and not that we can say we can do it or the phasing, all of that stuff, of course we have to work through, but more actual visuals of this is a splash pad, this is a dog park, this is where we could work this in, and it's shown and being seen in these images throughout the document. So whether they could just fit as an insert because we just need to get this document moved forward now and it goes like clean there, but if we could weave it in throughout in these pictures where you see instead of a green square, maybe it shows something a little bit more than that. And I know if that's like too much work, but I think what we're all kind of saying is that we want to see more of the parts that help the residents and draw us there versus like whatever some commercial developer is going to decide to do with their own land, which we have no control over in so many ways.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Chapin.
What you've said coagulates some things for me, whatever the right word is. Could we, Matt, could you maybe pull up page 25 on the plan, the vision plan?
Oh, sorry, I gotta get into Zoom and tell it to screen share. Vision plan. And you said.
And it's on what we're seeing there too. In the lower left, the loop that's by, but I wanted to do it based on page 25 because it's a little easier to see.
I may be a little off on pages.
It's the one that says step 2, vision plan step 2.
Page after that.
Next page, yeah.
It's just one off.
So right there in the lower left, you might want to use the cursor to show it. There's there's a park. But the rest of that loop has buildings in it. And what's the other side of those buildings is Gardener Supply. And what I was thinking is that whole loop should be the amphitheater place because it would not, noise-wise, if you had a concert, it would not disturb, you're disturbing Walmart, Home Depot, the interstate, Gardener Supply, and some car dealerships. In other words, you're not disturbing residential areas if you were to have open air concerts in an amphitheater. Once you fill a third of that space with residential, now you have competing uses and the noise is a problem. And so, and the thing about creating spaces, I've wanted that to be an amphitheater space and a park with amphitheater included in it. And if we could take the residential out of it, I would be so happy. That would make more sense to me. And similarly, at the top, I just don't want to show residential in the Alliance Church thing until we have determined that that's not supposed to be something else on our official map. Other than that, I really like the things. Oh, and the third thing is the thing I already said around the stormwater pond in the middle. That should be identified as a place for municipal spaces and municipal services reserved for that. And that, to me, that meshes with what you were saying about having places and at least on that for the amphitheater idea and the municipal idea. And then I don't know what we want in the Essex Alliance Church place, but that's one of the few places that's fairly flat and fairly large and on the edge. So.
Williston High School.
And I wanted to say one other thing, which I made a shared Google Drive with pictures of 3- and 4-story residential in Chittenden County to know what are people building. And to Emily's point, if you were a developer coming in here and you wanted to build something, what would you want to build? And what's the name of the corner on Route 7 where Blakely Road and
Severance Corner.
Severance Corner. Severance Corner has one of the four corners, and there's going to soon be a second one with residential. No commercial, just all residential, 4-story buildings. And it just is out, to me, it's like here, you're in the middle of a field and there's a 4-story residential buildings. And you get it also on the, near Lowe's. Anyway, there's places where we're getting apartment buildings and large buildings for residential around Chittenden County that are not part of a land use management plan where you have multiple services in the same place. They're just intersections, and so someone builds a lot of residential. So there must be a lot of pressure for that. So I do feel as though we want to represent the residential well, and we want to balance the amount of residential we have in the northeast quadrant with the other quadrants.
Other comments? Questions? I guess following up on that, Matt, one thought, oh, sorry, Ron, just one second. I was wondering if in the transmittal memo, one of these, what did you call friction points, might be public spaces, right?
We can
And
write that up.
what is locked in versus what
And how
is
to-
open?
And
you
how to
know?
afford them.
Right.
Yeah.
The vehicle financing.
Right.
You know, I think we can kind of try to structure the same thing.
Yeah.
I'll look for some direction. You know, what's locked in, well, we only have so much money.
Right.
Only so much of this is likely to become green.
Right.
Within that, you know, what's flexible, well, how much and what goes there
Mhm.
and what makes sense. And, you know, I think we could write that up, and I think, you know, going to the select board and back to the people who participated in this process and saying, you know, we really think that public spaces that are not inside of buildings are important, and all different opportunities for people to go out and do things in them is really important.
And some that are in
And some,
buildings.
yes,
Yeah.
Think of the old
Yeah.
firehouse on Church Street, the Firehouse Art Gallery.
Yeah.
the
There you go,
formal spaces.
there's a first floor civic use.
Yeah.
You know, a gallery.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, you know, Williston today, when it talks about community center, is still in a very traditional, let's go buy 50 acres somewhere and get some Texas architect to give
Right.
us a new, you know, a big honking thing with a big honking parking lot next to it. You know, I loved it when I spent my semester in Copenhagen. You'd get your class schedule.
Mm,
Well, where's this? Well, every classroom had a street address.
Yeah.
Because they were just randomly, not randomly, but they were just in buildings.
Yeah.
So you'd go down the street and, you know, get in this rickety old elevator with the iron doors and go up 4 floors. And then there was this classroom. And it was like, you know, the public space and community space and community center could be dispersed a little bit. And meeting space might make sense in the ground floor of a building somewhere. And swimming might make sense
Big
So-
parking lot.
somewhere with a big parking lot, or more co-located with a school. And, you know, space, you know, maker space, business incubator stuff, vendor spaces, things like that might make sense in different ways. And I think that's something that you could see slot into a lot of the different building types here. What you do have to do when you get to coding is think about where and how to apply that influence around buildings that are capable of that. One thing that has been very, very difficult in Williston is to get anybody to build a mixed-use building. And there's a lot of demand for residential. There's a lot of buildings in Taft Corners that can be 100% residential and be just fine. And like Taylor said, we're going to get asked to talk about first floor, and should the first floor be retail capable, even if it's programmed for residential initially, and where and how should that happen? But I think I'm talking a lot tonight about where the town is on its lifespan in terms of degrees of complexity and challenge it's willing to accept. The development community is in the same place. We're not in a place where developers are knocking out, you know, mixed-use buildings or even mixed-use projects very frequently. And remember that when they go to build these things, they're going back and convincing their bank that it's all gonna work out. It's all gonna lease. Those are maybe some of those external, not what we're locked into, but just like what are some realities we have to think about? Just how much of that can we get? How can we set the stage for it so that when the community is ready to build that, the town's ready to encourage it?
Ron, you had a comment or question?
Oh, no, Matt addressed it, so we
Oh,
go.
sorry. You should talk some, Ron. You haven't gotten to talk.
We moved sideways at the same time. Okay. Well, I feel like we've given a lot of feedback. Does anyone have any final comments? Kate, did you want to say anything? I want to give you a chance, even though I realize it's awkward on the phone. You can't see things.
Yeah, no, it is. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, we're in a car, so. No, I agree with a lot of the stuff Megan, Chapin, Alex has said, and about the community stuff. So, I mean, I'm a little bit concerned with 4-story buildings. I'd like to see less 4-story buildings. I love that idea Chapin had of the amphitheater being over there near Walmart. I think that's a kind of a great type of location for something like that. And I agree with you, Megan, on the Wright Avenue. I think the retail thing is very, unlikely, and that we shouldn't be betting on that. So one other point that I don't think anyone mentioned was I'm still quite skeptical of what they have in the parking lot of Maple Tree Place in front of Christmas Tree Shop. And I think that might need to be reimagined a little bit. But those are kind of my thoughts.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Kate. Yeah, and I agree with you on that Maple Tree Place thing. I think one reason I was okay with kind of moving forward is that it was something different, and so much of what we're seeing was kind of the same over and over again. And so I liked the idea of like, hey, let's play with this and think out of the box a little bit. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, Chapin.
Thank you. I just wanted to put a little bit of context. I serve on the Green Mountain Transit Board, and a couple of years ago, we did a full system analysis, paid hundreds of thousands to a consultant to do a lot of surveys and make a lot of recommendations. And we have walked back about half of the recommendations that we implemented in the next couple of years. The most recent was they had suggested that we combine routes, what they call interlining. So the route number 7 that went on North Avenue was combined with the route number 1 that comes to Williston, became the red route. So you take the red thing all the way from Williston to the end of North Avenue, and it interlines, meaning you could stay on the same bus if it went into the other route. It reduced the number of routes. It made the map simpler. We went to color coding. I really liked it because right now we have the number 1 running on Route 2 and the number 2 running on Route 15. And I just felt like the numbering system isn't working at all. So I was really glad. And yet what the feedback we've gotten is that it was too complicated because at the platform in Burlington, on one side is going north on the red, on the other side is going east on the red to Williston. And if you didn't, you can't, just knowing red wasn't enough to know which bus to get on. And enough times the same bus didn't continue. And so we actually have just walked that back too. So there are all these really exciting, good changes that I believed in were made, and we've been walking them back one after another. And so what I want to give that perspective on this process, because I feel as though this was wonderful in terms of the consultants drawing ideas out of the people of Williston and articulating them, and some of the stuff in the back here does that really well in the breakout sessions. I feel like a whole lot of good work was stimulated. When it comes to the actual images that we're shown, I feel like some of them are a little bit what you were saying. And we as a planning commission need to take responsibility for what it is that we say we are behind. And that may be hard. And I also, this may be a question for Taylor, who sort of set me straight last time on, I wanted more wider streets, and he was saying what the problems were with wider streets. And I feel like we're the people who represent Williston, and we need to get to the point that we understand what those trade-offs are so that we can be behind whatever we decide. And so I'm worried about how much time this would take of Taylor's or anyone else's, but I'm wondering if we can look towards a process of more digesting, as we did tonight, a lot of things that can then come out to specific things to change in the diagrams, or that we understand better what can and can't happen. So I'm just putting forward, I'm hoping to get more in-depth discussion.
I'm gonna throw a bunch of ideas back at you, Chapin. I think sorry about that. Unhooked on my headphones. I think how we proceed is certainly up to the PC and Williston staff. I know that we're hoping to have this vision plan and the transmittal memo in a good enough place to talk to the select board in late July. Kind of have general consensus about the vision to move forward with coding. What I heard tonight though is that there's maybe an ask for more visuals that better represent public space. Certainly some edits to the text. Again, reiterating the PC sort of want to reiterate the importance of public space in this area. I think making text changes is relatively easy and affordable given our budget. When we start talking about really big changes to specifically the photo renderings, not so much the maps, but the photo renderings, then we got to talk budget. We got to talk how that changes the timeline. I certainly don't think additional photo renderings could be done by late July. Just given the workload of our consultant team. And then how do we pay for it? I'd have to talk to Matt, and we might have to get creative with the budget. So yeah, timing's interesting, Chapin. Certainly text edits are easy. Map edits are probably easy and doable for this month. Photo renderings are going to be more difficult.
And we need to reach the place where we know, where we've agreed what the requested changes are. The step that we talked about earlier, where the document is made available in a way that we can put annotations. If we as a planning commission members could commit to, before our next meeting, having really gone through it and put all of our thoughts there so that all of our comments are together at the right place in the document, then could we decide next time whether we're going to ask for a change? I think the photo renderings are probably a small part if we get the text and the maps right.
So what I want to put out there is I've been really holding back on giving this to the select board, and I'm at my limit of being able to do that.
Okay.
I'm going to give them the version of this as it exists on Friday. So when you're thinking of the language in your transmittal memo, you may want to think about it as being responsive to that version, saying, well, we're really wanting to drop a picture of Route 2 in here. We're really wanting to have a picture of Wright Ave that's not quite so commercial here. So just keep that in the back of your mind. There is time to make those comments, and I think maybe enumerate them as a list at the end of that transmittal memo and say, so you select board have had a paper version of this for 2 weeks. You've had a chance to flip through it. Here's what we have to say about it. Here's where we'd like to start the conversation on the 27th. I think that's still very, very productive. But yeah, when I went and talked to the select board 2 weeks ago, they're like, when can we look at the document?
Yeah.
Because they're really excited. They've seen some of the visuals just from the May 3rd PowerPoint. They're excited to see how it all comes together. There's a lot of, if there was ever a time to capture some positive energy and say, please go buy us lots of green space in tap corners, this is it.
And to me, as long as it is characterized as that we're still working through it, I'm not against sharing it with the select board at all. But I don't want us to lose our momentum of the comments. We've now had 3 times that we sort of commented, and I feel like we haven't synchronized those comments so that they can result in changes to the document.
So yeah, we'll set you up. It'll be a Dropbox version. Commenting is basically, click where you want to comment and it'll identify the page you're commenting on. We can get that out to you and then share it back. Taylor, I'm thinking we'll just create a version
I feel like we could just put
out
the
of
Word
today's.
document in the
I'm
cloud.
talking about the vision plan.
Oh, that PDF?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will put we can put the Word document for the transmittal
sure.
to the cloud and we can work
Right.
with you on that as well. But I think you have some comments that you're gonna want to point at like a graphic in the vision
Yes.
plan and say, this is one we really think needs some attention.
Yes.
Because we could probably upload the PDF into the cloud and then you just drop Post-it notes on.
We can do that.
That would be fun.
So we'll set that up so it's interactive for you. And I think the other part is, as we broke out those friction point things is like, well, here's the general principle we need to follow. Here's the concern. And then also, here's what we know when we get into coding.
Yeah.
We're going, we can work with whatever's in this thing. We know where our compass is pointing for coding. And Taylor, there may be some checking back between you, me, and Jeff about, is it realistic? If the picture looks like this and we're ready to go to coding, but we have this level of comfort, is that realistic? You don't want to code 180 degrees away from what the picture
Yeah.
looks like, but I think that'll also give the select board a lot of confidence that you've got a strong sense of direction as you work into the next phase of this in the late summer and fall.
Okay, thanks. That's super helpful. Okay, keeping an eye on the time, I just want to give anyone a chance for a last comment. Do you need anything further from us right now?
No, I wanted to just mention what's coming up. We've talked a lot about the 27th, but we do have a meeting also on the 20th. And we're going to be giving you a status update on the New England chimney supply specific plan. Subcommittee's still got a bit of work to do, so we'll update the schedule for you on that. And yes, I know screen sharing stuff. And also we've invited Crystalline McSweeney, who's part of the Williston Racial Equity Partnership, to come talk a little bit about equity issues in planning, and both in terms of public process and overall goals of the plan. It's a perspective. I talked with Crystalline a few weeks ago. We talked a lot about equity as an emerging issue for us in Williston's plan. You really don't find it discussed anywhere in the current town plan. We expect there to be a lot of interest in discussing it in the 2025 town plan. So both thinking about ways that what the vision for Taft Corners is going to be can move equity issues in the right direction, and also as you're starting to think about what that next town plan is going to look like. So we'll try to make some space for that conversation. We'll check in on the comments on these two drafts as well.
Okay, so just a reminder also to planning commission members that July 27th, that joint session with the select board is not one of our usual meeting slots. So please add it to your calendar and let us know if you aren't able to attend, so that we can just be kind of on top of that. Okay, anything else?
And-
Great.
And for next time, on July 20th, in addition to the equity conversation, we're discussing form-based code, which is that the time to hopefully to amalgamate our comments?
Yeah, we'll bring the comment documents back. We'll show you where you've gotten, the week before, and then say, be ready to hash this out at that point.
Thank you.
Yeah, there might be a deadline so that we can, well, we're both out next week.
Yeah, it might be a quick
The
turnaround.
turnaround, yeah. Or the deadline might be the 18th, and then we turn it around on
On
Monday and Tuesday and present a draft that then goes to the select board for the 27th.
Okay, great. All right,
Can I make one
so,
more comment?
yeah, go ahead, Brian.
The graphics of this plan are very confusing. The existing buildings are shown as being dark gray, but they're shown on the plan as white, light gray, light brown, along Route 2A where any crossings, they're not existent at all. You can't read them at all. So if we just make all existing buildings dark gray, it would be a lot more
More
easier,
consistency.
more consistent,
Okay.
easier to read.
Great.
Thank you.
That was page 25 in case anybody's interested. Okay, great. So motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, thank you. I'm going to assume everyone is okay with adjourning, because that's rarely controversial.
Thanks, Jake.
Jill, did you have a comment or are you just voting in favor of adjourning? Okay, awesome, great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Have
everybody.
Good night.
a great 2 weeks. and we'll-
Thanks, good night.
Thanks, Kate.